888-866-8810. All right. Let's see. George, do we have you on the line, sir?
Good morning, Cody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good. Can hear you loud and clear. Let me get you introduced here. So if anybody doesn't know George, he's been on many times. He's produced shows on our One Body show. And George Toman is currently an assistant professor of psychology at Concordia University in Seward, Nebraska. He's a graduate of Fort Hays State University and has contributed, like I said, to the One Body show and even hosted a past Care-a-thon. He and his wife, Carmen, live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and are members of St. Peter Parish. George has a passion for sharing the faith with others, and that is very evident. It is wonderful to have you here this morning, sir. How are you?
I am doing well. It is good to be back on and with the listening audience.
Fantastic. Well, hey, this is going to be something that I can learn a lot from. The National Study of Catholic Priests, what we learned. I don't even know what the National Study of Catholic Priests was. So can you start us off there with what is this and what do we learn?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we, in 2022, the Catholic University of America and faculty within their Department of Sociology reported on a big survey study they did looking at diocesan and religious priests in the United States, and also bishops. And you can find this is public knowledge. Yeah, the official title of the study, for those that are real interested, is called Well-Being, Trust, and Policy in a Time of Crisis, Highlights from the National Study of Catholic Priests. And what we're going to do today, Cody, and for our listening audience, is we're going to just kind of go through the main results that they found, at least the summary of the results that they have shared publicly here. And we're also going to look at a follow-up study in 2023, so a year later from this publication, and looking at some of the other things that they found from that same collection of data. Right now, as we are talking, the university and that research team is currently doing a follow-up study. I'm trying to ask basically the same sample of priests here, other unique questions, and then we'll probably report on that here in the next year. The insights of the study are, at least in my opinion, very helpful. I will admit at the forefront here that some of the things that we'll share, we need to remember that the church is not only a divine institution, but she's also a human institution. And because there's humans involved, it can get messy at times. And so there are some things that the study brought out that especially diocesan priests mentioned that I think are worth at least noting and at least offering in our prayers to be able to help Mother Church going forward. And the most important thing I would say is near the end, assuming we'll have enough time, I'll also kind of provide some other little thoughts from the studies too, to kind of help, like, how as laity we can actually better support our priest and to really help our respective local churches. And ultimately, as you help your local church, you help your diocese as well, and obviously the overall universal church. And so we're going to kind of explore that. And like I said, the study is online, it's public knowledge. I actually got a hold of this study. I didn't even know either, Cody, that it existed until basically there was a few news outlets, and this is maybe now, at least a few months ago now, where there were some that were bringing the study back out and highlighting some of the points that were being said. And in the spirit of what our Care-a-thon here for the spring is about, pray, hope, don't worry, I think this is something here that we can take away with us, even though there's some information that, yes, I wouldn't say it's overall concerning, but definitely gives a new light into some of the tougher elements of what our priests are going through, but also how we can help them overall.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a real quick break because I want to congratulate Leon Staub of Hays. He was the winner of the trivia question. which was, which of these things comes first in holy orders? It's deacon. Deacon comes first, and we just had an ordination of a deacon here with Luke Freese just last weekend, and so we want to congratulate Luke on his diaconate ordination, and all of our deacons that we have, and thank them for listening to the call of God. So congratulations to Leon Staub. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. Please call 785-621-4110. We have $40,000 of, actually, let's jump that up. So, folks, we got to get those phones ringing, because we just had a loyal listener of Catholic Radio who has added another $10,000. Yes, you heard that right. $10,000 to the matching funds. So we now are starting today with $50,000, $50,720 of matching funds. We've got to get those used up, because those funds become our double. And so right now, I'm going to get the day started. My wife and I are going to pledge $500. And so please join with me, and let's start using up those funds. We're starting with $50,720. Call 785-621-4110 to make your pledge. All right, George, let's get back to you and start getting into this study. And I appreciate that you gave us that intro and that understanding of, our priests are human, and there are things that they need help with also.
You bet. And in the spirit of what you just said, Cody, let's keep the phones ringing there. And thank you to the donor who added that other 10,000 to the pot there. God bless you. So I'll start by saying, with survey research, and I'm going to get a little bit technical only to help the listening audience who may not know the strengths and limitations of these things, because you'll see in the news often surveys, such and such says this, and so it's going to do this, or this research says this, it's going to do that, and depending on the news outlet or who's talking, they may not know all the strengths and weaknesses, and frankly, sometimes it's misleading. So I want to briefly go through kind of how they did the study, so we can kind of get a sense of, all right, these are the people that were surveyed. And to also remember that at the end of the day, it is a representative sample, but it doesn't necessarily completely represent like your parish priest, in the diocese or something like that. There's obviously could be some nuances or some differences there. And because of that, it's important to know this is more on a larger scale, which, because it is on a larger scale, we could maybe look at things like having a kind of a overarching view, if you will, a view of the balcony of what's going on, but specific cases are always going to be unique. So again, the survey was done in 2022. It was conducted by Gallup, collaboration with Catholic University of America, this research team. And basically what they did was, from about a period of, I would say, about 6 months, they asked multiple thousands of priests in the United States, representing almost 200 different dioceses, gave them questions about wellness, trust, and other topics as well. And what they did is, the formal phrase that we use is that they did what we call a random stratified sample. I say that phrase very intentionally here, because how they chose to get these participants, these priests, if you will, and these bishops, is that they didn't just do kind of this, hey, here's this big net, and we're just trying to figure out how many fish we can get in the net kind of survey style participant recruitment strategy. What they did instead was that they randomly selected 10,000 priests, and they selected a random assortment of, and actually, let me go on the bishops here in a little bit, but they randomly selected 10,000 priests, sent the survey information to those 10,000 priests, and were able to get about 3,000 more respondents to that. So overall, it was a pretty decent response rate compared to what we sometimes get in survey research these days. It could always be better, which is why the follow-up study right now, I actually have the website on my other computer here, and they are very much saying, please, complete the study for follow-up, because that's important. But it's really not bad when we look at it overall. So because of the random sample, because it was generalized across a lot of different dioceses, a lot of different priests, it is safe to say that the results that they found are probably going to have more similarities than not to most of the most diocesan religious priests, compared to maybe focusing on one area and those things. And in terms of the bishops, how they ask the bishops for assistance in terms of completing the survey is that they did what's called a census type, which is basically they sent the information to every bishop, and they were able to get a 2/3 response rate, about 67%. And so for us, we have a good sample of bishops, we have a good sample of both diocesan and religious priests, looking at well-being, trust, and all those things. And so that's a really good start. And again, that's the most technical I'm going to get in this talk, just so that we can kind of set the tone of, hey, there is a good structure to this. And if someone were to try to, obviously anyone can critique research because every research has weaknesses, but in terms of how they approach this study and how the research team was very transparent and looked at trying to get things in a good random way, we can, like I said, we can be safe that there's the data shared is going to cover most of the United States versus some area or some specific political or ideological thought. So I say all of that to then get us into kind of the purpose behind this. So we have been very fortunate. I believe it was 1993, and then it was 2002, and now 2022 and ongoing right now, where we've had opportunities where a group of people, primarily researchers or a survey type company, has been able to survey thousands of priests and kind of get a sense of how the priesthood is going. How is the leadership going, at least in the church in America? Relevant things in society. How is it impacting the priest? And so we have kind of this trend where we've been able in clusters every 10, 20 years to be able to look and see how our priests are doing using some sound research techniques. And specifically for this study, one of the things that they highlighted right off the bat was that in 2002, as many of us know in the listening audience, that was a time, at least here in the church in America, where in the Catholic Church there was a lot of things going on, especially with the sex abuse crisis. And so in 2002, the Dallas Charter was implemented by the conference, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which gave a zero tolerance policy to abuse cases. And that, for the researchers, since we're now essentially at this time that the study was done and ultimately written here, at that time that was 20 years, so a few years ago in the present day, but 20 years later, how has that moment of our history here in the United States affect the presbyterate? How does that affect the bishops? How does that affect some of the other dynamics of the church, at least in the sense of well-being and those things?
Okay,
And
I'm going to take a really quick
yeah.
break here. And I want to remind people that are listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon. And also, to correct myself a little bit, I apologize. I looked at the sheet wrong. So still very excited. But we started the day with $40,720 in funds that we have received. Our matching funds then, with the added $10,000, are actually at $18,640. So that one's on me. I looked at the sheet wrong. I apologize. But we still do have some wonderful people out there and wonderful donors who gave us those extra $10,000. So help us to chip away at that $18,640, and let's use it up. Because if we get to the end of the day and we've used those up, then obviously that means that we've made around $37,000 in funds today that are donations from all of you wonderful folks out there, especially looking for those new donors. If you're a current donor and you've always donated, we absolutely need that also. But we also are looking for those new donors who have never given before, are listening now, and are being poked and prodded a little bit by the Lord, hey, I think you could partner with them and help them out. So partner with us, help keep us on the airwaves, help us to keep this gospel message going. 785-621-4110. Let's get back to George Toman talking about the National Study of Catholic Priests and what we learn. All right, George, so you were talking about the study and how it's been over 20 years since part of that study was done. And now what we're going to look at to see how things are going from there. Is that correct?
That is essentially correct. Yeah, we're looking. So the survey was done a few years ago. We're looking at since 2002, how have, especially like things like the Dallas Charter, how we've approached things like the sex abuse crisis and other things. How has that played a role in terms of well-being of priests, well-being of bishops? How has that influenced how they kind of see each other, for lack of a better term, and get some insights into kind of that organizational human aspect of the church, at least within the clergy. Yes. So we'll start with this, which I find very refreshing. When asked about well-being of priests, at least those surveyed a few years ago, an overwhelming majority said that, in terms of using the scale that the researchers did, that they were what we would call flourishing, or in other words, they really liked and appreciated and valued what they do. So in terms of and how the numbers came out, 77% of the pre-surveyed and 81% of the bishops had a level of well-being that, again, we would say was flourishing. They wake up, they know their purpose, they're doing their duties. Yes, some days are tougher than others, but they find purpose, mission, value in their state of life.
Hey, George, can I ask you and
Yep.
see if you know? And I think from my understanding, that's way higher than if you go to the secular world and just ask regular folks, in their
Yes.
profession. Now, obviously, this is a vocation different than a profession. But when you go and ask people, in your profession, are you happy? Are you satisfied? It's my understanding that that's way higher than the layperson at large. Is that correct?
You are 100% correct, Cody.
Okay.
You keep throwing questions at me here because that's a great one to really highlight, which is, yes, this is, now I don't have the actual like statistical other numbers here, but when we look at it from a very general sense, yes, like you're not going to see in terms of like large scale organizations like the size of the Catholic Church, which again, you can't find too many of them that are as large of that, to have this high of a number of its representatives say, yeah, I'm flourishing. I like what I'm doing. I enjoy the ministry. I enjoy the purpose. That's really, in fact, it's kind of on the other end of the spectrum for in terms of the secular world and other things, in terms of professional enjoyment and all of that. So, that should be a very good sign for us. And I think another reason why that gives me a lot of hope is when we think of how tough it is in the world today to function as a Christian. Not just Catholic, but in general, Christianity. I think that's really nice to know that, especially in the Catholic Church, we have our clergy and a good, again, overwhelming number of them who report back that, yeah, this is a purpose-filled life. And in other areas where we know, like in organizational psychology and other areas, again, not to get too academic here, but we do know that in places where there's a lot of burnout, or the retention rate is very low in terms of keeping employees, these types of well-being skills are really, really low. So we are very fortunate as a church, even though sometimes things look bleak, that our priests and our bishops seem to be having, at least they are reporting anyway, that they have a really good sense of what, again, the survey would measure as a flourishing well-being. Now, the kind of the caveat or the counter to that, though, is that there are threats to your well-being, right? There are things that can zap your peace. There are things that can make the days even tougher, to a point where, maybe you start losing morale and those things. And the survey also covered those things, and specifically look at priestly burnout. They use another scale to kind of measure different areas of burnout that are relevant to the clergy. And they did find some unique differences that I do want to highlight. So of those pre-surveyed, 45% of them reported at least one symptom of ministry burnout. And there was actually a unique unbalance between diocesan and religious priests. So diocesan priests actually reported, more of them reported at least one symptom of ministry burnout than religious priests. And not to get into the whys of that for us, because there's other data here, and there's a lot of probably explanations why, but a few things to think about for our diocesan priest, and for a lot of us in the listening audience, that's all we know is our diocesan priest. One of the things that we need to remember with diocesan priests, and especially and I'm even thinking of, I live in Nebraska right now, that's where I'm talking from, but when we think of like in Kansas, there are some parishes, and some of our listening audience know this, there are some parishes where, one priest is shared amongst 3 rural parishes, in a 20-30 mile radius. Or in some cases, like in Wyoming, where I'm from, it could even be as maybe a 40-50 mile radius where one priest covers multiple parishes, and he's it. Like he's the guy. And so there's a lot of potential isolation in the diocesan priesthood when those situations come up. Now, again, it doesn't happen all the time, obviously, but it is something to be very cognizant of, in that for our priests who especially are covering large areas and they might be the only priest around, not having someone else there or having another priest or another support system there can make the vocation very difficult to conduct, even just on the technical levels. Being able to be there for confessions, be able to handle multiple masses, all the travel involved, all those other things. Now, the unique thing with the religious life, if you're a religious priest, you live in community in most cases, right? And so when you think about it in that sense, you're waking up at the same time with a bunch of your brother priests, you say your prayers together, you go to mass together, then you may, if you're more of an active order, you may go out and do your activities, teach, serve the poor, whatever the case is. But then you come back together, have a meal together, commune together, pray together, and then all go back to your rooms and go to sleep. And you just do that same routine over and over and over again. Meaning that for the religious priest who's in kind of that community, there's more supports there than maybe the diocesan priest, who, again, wakes up in the morning, says mass in one church, travels down the road for an hour and a half, says mass in another church, then handles, 2 to 10 calls in that time period, handling certain matters within the parishes, again, all by themselves, then having to do other responsibilities, maybe has to do an emergency call to handle someone who's sick or dying, and then go back home and do that all over again. So in terms of the priestly burnout piece, what this study was essentially getting at is that, hey, diocesan priests seem to be a little more vulnerable to burnout. And on top of that, what they also found was that priests under the age of 45 had a higher chance, a higher risk, if you will, of experiencing burnout than maybe the older priest. And not to get into any causes there, but that could be anything from, say, hey, I'm new to being a priest, so how do I operate this very complex role? It could also be maybe some of the younger priests very ambitious and want to try to save the world, but then realize there's a lot of things going on and you got so many things on your plate that's hard to keep anything organized. All those things maybe also play a role into this potential of burnout. So again, the well-being of priests, really, really good, really, really good. But in terms of burnout, there is potential of that. And what the survey found in diocesan priests, it's higher than religious priests. And then for younger priests, they had a higher chance of experiencing at least one symptom of burnout compared to some of their other brother priests who may be older, like in their 60s and 70s, etc.
Yeah, thank you, George. That is such important information that I'm really glad you're sharing with us, because we all understand and we get it. If you've been around the diocese at all, and this priest is in charge of 4 small parishes, and that's not a singular thing in our diocese, and also across the country, there's a lot of the same problems, and so. Praying for and fostering religious vocations, especially within your own family. This is one of the things that I want to key on just really quickly. in a lot of situations in our life, we're like, oh yeah, well, somebody else will take care of that, or I'll pray for religious vocations, but that'll be somebody else's son. Like, maybe God is asking your son. And so that's one of those things, is we all need to be open to allowing God to work in our children's lives the way that he wants to, and not dissuading them, especially if it's from the priesthood, from being able to serve, because that's what is causing some of these problems. Is we have a shortage of priests. Well, a shortage of priests means that there's less of them to go around, obviously. And so, yeah, that could be causing some of that burnout, is just, well, we have nobody else. You've got 4 parishes.
Yes. And even on a more, I don't want to even, your points were great, Cody. I can't say that any better. I'll add to what you said too, that also with priests, and even in those places where maybe you're better off, you have an assistant, you may have a pastor in residence where, you have multiple people to kind of help share the responsibilities. Even as lay faithful, one thing, and I'll just say this now, kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself, but one thing as the lay faithful, we can do a better job is proactively trying to help our parish within the gifts that God has given us, and not just filling out that card at the beginning of every year at our stewardship form, if you will, but really being serious about what gifts do I have that I can help in the parish. So I'll give you the prime example that came to my mind as you were talking, Cody, where you'll have people saying, well, Father needs to do this. He needs to do this Bible study, right? Or Father needs to be more whatever here or there. But then when you point the finger at yourself and you ask, what are you doing to help the church? You only show up maybe on the weekend, or, you're very not involved. And so it's kind of an unfair, if you will, maybe expectation to a degree, in that, we don't know, unless you really live it, the very complex nature of how God calls our priests to serve his people. And it can be everything from getting that baby baptized to all of a sudden having to bury someone. That can all happen within the same day, and a bunch of other things. And the more that we can help our priest and help their vocation, if you will, of bringing more souls into the church, I think that also would help this burnout issue, because now all of a sudden you're not just dealing with congregation that shows up on an hour on the weekend and then you don't see him again until the next weekend. You have this constant activity in the church of trying to minister to all these different groups in the community, and it's not just on the priest hands alone.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And I thank you so very much for bringing that up, because, if you look up the studies, it's something like 7% maybe of people are involved at a functioning level within their parish, and then they're the ones that you always see. They're the same ones that are helping out with everything. And so we've got to be willing to be those people that step up and say, hey, I've got to help make it more than 7%. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. We've got our Care-a-thon goal of $125,000. This is day 3. Let's see if we can make it the best one yet. Start getting those phones going. 785-621-4110. And to help you guys start those phones out a little bit, we've got our second trivia question. So call that same number, 785-621-4110, to answer this question. We'll get you put into the drawing at 6 o'clock today for a gift certificate to Messenger, Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts here in Hayes. And they're also online at traditionalcatholicstore.com. All right, here we go with our second question. Who was the first pope? Was it Anthony, Peter, Paul, or Matthew? Who was the first pope? A, Anthony, B, Peter, C, Paul, D, Matthew. Call 785-621-4110 to answer that question, to give us your pledge, or both. Remember that we cannot do this without all of you. You are what make us run. So really, you're our bosses. So you pay us, and then you get to help us understand, this is what I like. This is what I would hope you guys would change. And we get to help enact what we can to make sure that these radio waves are being sent out there and that people are hearing the gospel message. We're listening to George Toman talk to us about the National Study of Catholic Priests. So George, let's just jump right back in it.
Sure. Thank you there, Cody. So now in terms of the study, this is where things get a little bit more bleak. And I want to, again, preface all of this because I don't want anyone going, oh my gosh, this is the case here in our diocese or whatever, and got to figure this out and whatever. It's more of a list, we'll just talk about the data. We'll talk about what they found and kind of what to do with that. And remember that this is on the larger scale of the church in the United States. But I do think it's important to bring out. So the second part of this study was looking at, what were some of the factors that were causing kind of mistrust, whether it be among the priests, the bishops, against each other, whatever the case is. And there was something very interesting here to point out. So I mentioned earlier this morning, in terms of these large scale surveys that have been done, looking at all these, looking at thousands of priests. We had a survey in 1993, had a survey right at the turn of the millennia, 2000, 2001, 2002. And then we had one recently, 2022, at least in the data being reported then. In terms of diocesan priests specifically, reporting of how well they trusted their bishop. In 1993, 55% of the diocesan priests reported that they had confidence in their bishop at the time. In 2001, it went up to 63%. In 2022, the number was at its lowest. Only 49% of diocesan priests and key qualifier diocesan priest reported having confidence in their bishop, whereas with religious priests, or looking at their superior, almost 2/3 of them expressed confidence in their leader. So I bring this out to say that this was one of the parts of the study where the survey really kind of took a unique turn in a good way, in that it showed that there was trust issues going on in the family. Now, again, kind of trying to qualifying this so that we don't go too far either direction in terms of this data, because we can always infuse stuff in the information that's not necessarily there. The key to remember here is, like, just like with any organization, you have a leader and you have the people who report to that leader, whether it be administrator and all those things. And there's always dynamics involved that make that communication, that feedback loop, that relationship difficult. And we know in organizations, the more that leaders can do a good job keeping the communication lines transparent, open, being able to make good decisions as needed, and being able to hear their people, the better the chance that organization has, at least in terms of its trust, having a better chance than others. The same is kind of being shared here, where in terms of the priests who answered this survey, there was a lot of things that they felt that their bishop could do a better job, whether it be communication, being transparent, making better decisions, or at least making decisions that are more maybe collaborative, that would help improve the trust versus than what they're currently experiencing. And real quick, and I know you probably got an answer, Cody, to the question and all that. The amount of flourishing, the well-being piece that I talked about earlier, the survey then kind of, when they found this maybe little piece of trust as an issue, they actually kind of split it up, and they split up the priests who said that they had a great deal of confidence in their diocesan priest, great deal of confidence in their bishop, versus those that reported very little. And the percentage difference between those two groups, where in terms of their trust. So basically, those who had a great deal of confidence in their bishop had a flourishing well-being score that was really good. And then for those that had little trust in their bishop, their scores went down by about 11 percentage points overall when you look at the reporting. So there was definitely a correlate there between having trust in your bishop and also your perceived sense of well-being, and how much that influenced how you felt about, again, well-being as a priest and flourishing in your ministry.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. And there's so many, I really appreciate the way that you prefaced that, be careful how you interpret, because there's also, there's other factors that can be involved as to why things are the way that they are, but such good information that you're sharing with us, to one, let us know, we need to be praying for our leaders, for our priests and our bishops, but two, where is it, as you said earlier, George, that we as parishioners can help out, because our priests are human too. They're not robots. They don't have an endless supply of energy. They have to sleep, eat, and have well-being also. And so where is it that we can help? So thank you very much, George, for all of that. I do want to congratulate Jennifer Brown. She is our trivia winner. All right. Scott and Jennifer are good friends of mine, and they donated $100. So thank you so very much, Scott and Jennifer, for your donation. That became $200 with those matching funds. And we will put you into that drawing for that gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts today at the 6 o'clock hour. All right. That question was, who was the first pope? Correct answer there is Peter. We are going to get back then to talking with George Toman in just a second, but I want to remind everybody you're listening to Divine Mercy Radio Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And we are praying that you will call in and join with us to help us chip away at those matching funds. 785-621-4110. Let's get some of those big pledges today. If you are a $5,000 donor, call in and let's get that ball rolling. If you're a $1,000 donor, call in. 125, whatever you can give. 785-621-4110. Maybe we can get somebody who gives 2025 for 2025. 785-621-4110. All right, George, right back to you.
Yeah, thank you there, Cody. So going back to kind of that, to help kind of contextualize what this can look like. And obviously, I'm a married man. I'm not a priest. So I haven't lived the life, but thinking about the dynamics of the diocesan priest to his bishop. I know for as lay faithful, Cody, you're probably in a similar way that I am. Every year when we get the new priest assignments, it's one of the first things that we click to kind of see, one, is my priest going? And two, where are the other priests going? Are we getting any new changes? And it's kind of a weird, for me at least, it's an activity I don't know why I'm so interested in, but I do pay attention to that. Now, take that though from the lay side, and then imagine if you're the diocesan priest, who again, you probably have already had the conversation before this point, before that official notice was made. But let's say that you're in a parish where you really like, or you're in a parish that, maybe you're making some gains on things. And then again, the promise of being obedient to your bishop, you need to be moving to somewhere else. And then it's like, all right, what do we do now? In other cases, you're talking about decisions that have to be not only done at the local level, but even at the diocesan level. So maybe there's some project that you're trying to figure out, the Catholic school or some renovation project, and you're trying to figure out on a larger diocesan level, what can be done to help. And maybe like any organization, maybe things don't go well as planned and those things. I mentioned those little examples, and there's many more, but there's a lot of things that can frankly create some dissent and frustration between the bishop and the priest, just by nature of kind of the technicalities of being in the organization, right? We know that the church is a divine institution, so God is always present, he's always involved, he's always working in the members of the church. But because the church is also human, and God entrusts us with care and ministry to the church, especially to the people of the world, like there's going to be issues going on, because again, humans, were sinful, we're not perfect. And so again, I say that because when you think of, for the listening audience, if you think of like your own organizations, you think of your own workplace, and you think of like, your supervisor, and maybe you don't like your supervisor because they made this unilateral change, and you're like, I don't know that decision, but we had to do it anyway. And then it's the water cooler talk about 30 minutes as to why, the organization has bad leadership and whatever. You can imagine that maybe that conversation in some shape or form could be even happening in our diocese in the United States. And I think that's a very reasonable thing to say, because again, decisions have to be made. Sometimes they're made with good intent, but maybe the feelings are hurt. Sometimes they're made not not thinking well at all, unfortunately, and then people have to deal with that, or people may not understand the full nature of why a decision has to be made, and it leaves this really weird, icky feeling about why things are happening. So I say all that because, again, when you think of this lower level of trust between, at least in terms of those surveyed, the diocesan priest to their diocesan bishop, we have to also consider it may be more than just, personality differences. There could be other things going on because we are this large institution and those things. Now, on the flip side, the survey does a good job saying, okay, we found this area where there's trust to things going on. So what do our diocesan priests need from our bishops? And so the first thing, and this is now maybe more on the hope side here, the priests were asked in the survey, what were their sources of social support? Okay. And the number one, the highest, so 93% of the priests surveyed reported that their lay friends were a good source of social support for them, followed by family and then their parish. So they actually separated out their lay friends from their parishioners there. Unfortunately, not to pick on our leaders, our bishops here, but only 60% of priests reported that their bishop of their diocese was a source of social support. So for hope here, for our lay faithful, if you're good friends with your parish priest or friends with your parish priest, there's a very high likelihood that your priest sees you very fondly and really appreciates that support. They really appreciates that kind of attention and friendship and charitable love that you give them. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say, and this is where we need to pray, our diocesan priest also don't see, well, it's still majority, 60% of the priests who reported, but obviously the number is quite lower than it was for lay friends. There's not, the priests are struggling seeing their bishop as a social support, which then makes it challenging, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the bishop's your leader there, right? So in terms of, and again, this is just looking at specifically from the diocesan priest perspective there. So I'm going to not wrap us up here, but for time, I'm going to kind of get to what we can do about this overall and how we can try to help the cause, at least from the lay faithful side of things.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead, Cody.
I was going to just break in really quickly to remind everybody that you are listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon, Pray, Hope, and Don't Worry. We've got a $125,000 goal to reach by the end of tomorrow. And so we need you to help us get there. Please call in. Let's get those phones rolling. 785-621-4110. If you're driving down the interstate and you're just picking us up for the first time, pull off of the interstate before you use your phone, but pull off and call in, give us a donation. If you're running your kids around and you got a chance to stop here in a little bit, call us up. If you're working out, take a little bit of a break, call us up, 785-621-4110. Let's get those donations coming in. We've got over $18,000 of donations that we need to use up by the end of today. Let's get it done. 785-621-4110. We are on talking with George Toman about the National Study of Catholic Priests, and he just gave us some very good information about one of the things that we can do to help out is to be there for our priests. Every priest is different, and that's something that we need to remember also. It is in their it is in their calling as a priest to be to listen to their bishop. So when their bishop says, hey, I need to move you, they just got to go. And so we have to be those people that are willing to uphold our priests, to befriend them and be there for them. So George, we thank you so very much for that. Where are you going to take us now on this study?
Yeah, we're gonna cut right to some recommendations and some kind of final thoughts, because, and again, trying to be respectful here, because when we see this issue of trust, again, we can go off into a lot of different tangents as to why that's the case and all of that. But again, when you think of a pure organizational psychology kind of perspective here, if you will, it should be no surprise with large organizations, and again, the Catholic Church and any diocese, and even frankly, parishes too, those are large organizations, right? It is hard to take care of them in a really good way where everyone's happy. And so we have to be mindful that, again, this is tough work. This is tough work. Again, it's important. We talk about the salvation of souls. That's the number one mission of the church. We talk about serving the poor. That's very important. That should never go away. That's our foundational stuff. But to be conscious of the fact that we're dealing with large organizations, and especially with bishops, they have the tough responsibility of handling the care of their diocese. And then the priest have to also then support the bishop in handling those responsibilities. And again, if they're not on the same page, or if there's some little dissent going on, or there's a personality mismatch, or there's a political mismatch, or whatever the case is, let's be real, it makes life difficult. This is a human organization also. And so because of that, it makes life like sometimes a little bit tricky. So rather than embracing the problems, let's embrace some solutions. So the survey itself pointed sharing some recommendations that the priests shared in terms of how we can rebuild trust from, again, diocesan level priest to the bishop. How can that relationship kind of get a little bit better? And the first thing that the survey mentions was to strengthen the personal relationships between the bishops and the priests, not as administrator, but rather as a brother, a father. So really bringing this aspect of, look, like, you're my leader, yes, but also, again, we'll hear bishops say it. This is, my brother priest, but from the survey here, the priests don't feel like they're truly a brother to that bishop. At least not the majority of the time. So strengthening those relationships, not in the sense of the professional organizational piece, but strengthening them in the sense of that brother, that fatherly kind of aspect. So frankly, when you think of it in those terms, being present, having conversations, being available, all of those things priests recommended in the survey. Again, this isn't the researchers, these were the priests making these recommendations to help improve that relationship. Number two, and this is, I think, for any organization, so this doesn't surprise me at all. It may surprise some people, but from just the business world, it doesn't here. But having better, clear, two-way communication. So as much as possible, can those being affected by a decision be part of that conversation, assuming that can happen, right? Can all the right stakeholders be at the table? Number two, being open in the conversation, including, if this decision sucks, let's just call it for what it is. It's going to suck, but we got to try to get the most of it. That kind of openness, priests recommended as a way to help kind of rebuild that trust. And lastly, to be fair in terms of the study, many priests also emphasized the need for accountability in the bishops in order to rebuild trust with not only them as priests, but also with the laity. And the accountability piece is really looking at, hey, if, as priest, we're, with the Dallas Charter, the zero tolerance policy, going back to that sex abuse, how the church resolved this, or at least a solution to the sex abuse crisis, and ongoing to how are the bishops being accountable in that way as well. And the priests in the survey recommended that, and the researchers did a good job bringing out that theme and sharing it publicly here. Now, I say all of those things again, not to get us off on all of that, and to be, again, fair to our bishops. Again, you think of like, Bishop Vinking and the others there in Kansas and the rest of the United States, like, they have a big area to cover. They have a lot of souls to worry about, right? They have a lot of things on their plate. So obviously, to be fair to our bishops, there's a lot of things in leading the Catholic Church that many of us don't even know, that makes things difficult. So there's a lot of room for improvement that can be felt from everyone here. But also, I would also say, and this is kind of me interjecting my thoughts now, is also having a great sense of mercy as well.
Yeah.
And trying to be forgiving. So if there are mistakes, at least being willing to admit them, and being able to, at least in terms of this, in terms of what God, does for us, being merciful, then we be merciful to each other there. So in terms of the lay faithful, Cody, then I'll let us go of this and get out of your way. For the lay faithful, the two things I would say, number one, obviously pray. And I know, again, sometimes it's like, oh gosh, here we go again, talking about prayer and all that stuff. But I promise you, prayer is very powerful. Prayer can help things and problems that we don't even know. And that's really important. So if you have right now, folks, if you have a priest that you really like, you have a bishop that you really like, pray for them. Thank God for them. And try to make it every single day where you don't go to bed without saying, Heavenly Father, thank you for this holy priest. Thank you for my friend who's a priest. Thank you for my bishop who's taking care of me. Thank you for what our bishop is doing. Okay. If that's how you are, again, expressing that gratitude and thanksgiving to the Father for that blessing he's giving you. If you're in a spot where maybe you don't like your priest, let's be frank about that, or you don't like your bishop, still thank God the Father for having a minister of the sacraments to you, and pray that God in his wisdom that is beyond our understanding may help find a solution and resolve to the prayer that you have, and be entrusting God to that, rather than, going to Twitter and making a story there, or, maybe, going on the side and maybe causing, causing some dissent. Offer that in prayer to our Father. He wants to listen to you. He wants to answer you. Last thing is this, and again, this is primarily now, if anyone is a bishop listening to this, and I know that's a stretch here, but I do feel, after sharing all of this, I do want to say this after reading this study. In education, business, whenever we have a situation where there's mistrust, one of the things that we do recommend is essentially this little short saying, which is, if you want to help put change in your organization, put your energy into the behaviors and things that you want to see. So in other words, if you want to see more people being friendly to each other than dissenting, if you want to see more people saying thank you in the morning versus critiquing each other, if you want to see more people collaborating and all those things, as the leader, do it yourself. So make that extra phone call to the priest. Make that extra effort to maybe be present at a time. Put effort into the things you want to see, because when you do that, the people around you see that as the leader, and then they ultimately want to imitate that, just like a child imitates their father, the behaviors of their father. So if we can remember those things, I think stuff in this survey, which was really good to bring out, we can also have the resolution. And again, in terms of the spirit of our Care-a-thon, pray, hope, and don't worry. We pray for the betterment of the church. We hope in the resurrection of Christ. We hope in that eternal promise that God is with us here, especially in the church. And frankly, we try not to worry through that. Even though things may be a little bit difficult, God always finds a way to correct the ship. And when all that's said and done, again, the church will always stay around despite of how society is. And that's why it is great being Catholic. So Cody, thank you so much, listening audience. Thank you so much for having me on, but I'll let you go and have a great Care-a-thon. Okay.
Thank you so much, George. You were a blessing. Have a great day, sir. All right. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Spring Care-a-thon. Pray, hope, and don't worry. We had a lot of information, a lot of great information from that study that George was talking about. And one of the things that I can say is, we are so blessed here in the Salina Diocese. Our shepherd, Bishop Vinky, he is one of those people that, as George was talking about, go the extra mile, make that phone call and things like that. Our bishop gets around. He knows his parishioners. He knows his priests. He loves his flock, and we are so blessed by him and by all of our priests who do so much to take care of us. So please thank your priest. Please thank the bishop, and as George said, pray for them. They need it. They do so much for us. And I want to remind everybody